What's up, my friend? So you probably know that flying wasn't allowed in WoW until the end of TBC, and even then it was only allowed in the Outlands and later Northrend. And it wasn't until Kata, when the original continents were completely rebuilt, that we could fly in the vanilla lands. And that was because the zones in those continents were designed separately and then made to fit into a loose outline of the continent without much consideration for how they were stitched together. So this is going to be a full flyover of the original vanilla 1.12 map. We'll look at it all, but we'll focus on sort of these inaccessible areas between the zones. And this one's a little longer, but I hope it's interesting. Sit back and enjoy, and I'll have chapters in the description if you want to check this out in parts. Here we go. So we're starting off here in Northshire Valley. I'm going to try and find a good mix of speed so it doesn't take too long, but we can see what we want to see. Starting over the human starting zone there, we would have been fighting wolves and kobolds down there. And if we go north, this might have been the very first set of mountains that you tried to scale unsuccessfully as a player. If you could have, you would have seen this cool waterfall and house that's really only there and accessible as a flight path coming over in original classic. It's just decorative. And then further north of that, we get to this first sort of unfinished zone that would be the zone between Burning Steps on our right and north of Stormwind, this big kind of unfinished flat area that is to the south of Morough and the north of Stormwind. And you see the first instance of where two textures come together, and they didn't make much consideration for blending them because no player was ever going to get here. So if we move into Stormwind from the north side, you can see that there is this what is actually a big transparent backdrop model in the sky that's just meant to be behind the keep. And when you first get there, you see there's no Stormwind, and the camera kind of flickers a little bit, and that's because of this concept of view culling or port culling, where Stormwind, which is just a model, a big model object placed on top of that flat terrain, only pops in and out of view depending on your distance. It's only going to render in when you're close to it. Actually, when your camera is close to it, I think. Precisely. So the different sections of it only pop in and out of view when we happen to be close. So there's no Stormwind, and this would be something that they, of course, would have had to fix as once you could fly over the entire thing in Kata. So there's a break down there in the terrain because the room that you poured into in the mage portal is actually down below where you think you are, and it's down in this sort of opening in the terrain. And so there's the mage quarter there, popping in and out of view. And the big cathedral is in this model is just there's sort of like the real cathedral, but you could see for a second there previously, there's another cathedral that's above the model that's meant to be seen from the flight path when you come in, so that Stormwind looks sort of more, I guess, grandiose. So if we continue north, you have this big flat area that's, again, a completely like unfinished, unused zone between northern Stormwind and southern Morough. And if I speed over toward the coast here, you get to the edge of the continent. This will be a very much recurring theme. Finished mountains that if you were one of those early explorers like me and you tried to swim your way around the continent and see where you could go, you'd come here, but it was very frustrating. You could never get up the mountains, and that's because if you could have, many times there was just these borders between zones that were unfinished. So now we're at the northern edge of this zone between Morough and northern Stormwind, and you can see the start of the snow there. If I quickly zoom over to where Burning Steps is, we're heading toward Blackrock. I guess we're now north enough to be at Searing Gorge. You see the border for Searing Gorge there. Swing back around toward one of my favorite things where three different terrains all come together. We've got Searing Gorge and the unfinished zone, and then the snowy Morough. And then it's all flat, but you can see they did have terrain here for the south side of Morough, or probably more precisely, I think this is going to be the starting area for the gnomes and the dwarves down here. Coldridge Valley, that's where you'd kill your first set of wolves and boars and some trolls back there in a troll cave. But if we continue north, on our right would be the western side of like Morough proper, where you're going to be questing near Nomergon and everything else. But on the left, on the west side, is another area that maybe they could have used. It looks like it has terrain and texture, but it's just, of course, completely empty. This big empty zone. And again, one more instance of where the zone terrain, the snowy, meets up with, if there's height differences, sometimes you see this sort of strange, hard to see in the light there, but strange sort of like zigzag texture or terrain. And then you get the default border of the continent, which is way down there because the height is so different down below. But if we come back in toward Morough, back across this big sort of flat area, I'm going to do a very fast flight across this entire zone and get us to like the north side of, say, what would I guess be Searing Gorge. So here we are. You'd be questing in your sort of pre-level 10 area if you were a gnome or a dwarf. Ironforge is there in the distance. There's the road going up to it there. All the snowy questing there. Down there would be some trogs in this quest. And over here would be sort of the north side of Searing Gorge. And you can see it down there. There would be the pathway in. And again, this is where Searing Gorge comes together with the Badlands. This would be the horde town of Kargath, I think, down here. Spin back around toward southern Loch Modan. This is where Loch Modan and Badlands and Morough all sort of come together. And you can see again, didn't ever intend to see this border, so it's very rigid, just lines in the border. And if we head in over Loch Modan real quick, got this quest killing these those guys down there, those scouts. Trogs, they're called the Trogs. There's the loch over there. And the dam. And if I spin back around toward the northern side of Loch Modan, get back into the east side of Morough down here. And if we head north, you get to border with some of the terrain for Wetlands here. And this area is almost like this big peninsula that goes down into Wetlands where you were never going to be able to get to. You've got this area down here to the right that I think is where, yeah, where you'd be sort of coming into Wetlands. Then a big flat sort of halfway up area here. And down to the right down there would be where the dinosaurs all are, the raptors. Quest in there and go across that bridge. Left side is where you come down from Ironforge. Now it's decorated here. That tunnel you never would have gone into. It's just sort of decorative for the flight path down. And then we come around and we can take a quick look at Menethil Harbor from the air. And zoom back across Wetlands quickly. Killing alligators and gnolls down there. Some orcs on the right side, on the south side of this. And when you get up to this area, this would be where, like, so this is like Wetlands elites, right? It's the dwarves down in there that you'd be killing. And then we get to one of the coolest areas, the Thandal Span with the bridge. It crosses really the fact that this whole continent's actually broken on both sides by water. And you move into Arathi Highlands. Didn't need to go quite that fast. And Refuge Point would be over here. There's sort of the different elementals there. And I'm just going to go straight across here. There is Buri's Farmstead, the counterpart for Goshek, where, of course, Alliance mages like me like to farm. And then you get up to, if you were to try to scale the mountains, which you never could have in Arathi, they bordered the southern edge of Hinterlands. And that border looks like this. And again, you have just a very strange area of gray texture just pasted in there. And if we come down these mountains, you get into Hinterlands from the air. Very cool looking zone. And you can only appreciate it if you're flying in, the fact that Airy Peak is basically a giant eagle statue. And if I zoom south now, you get into Hillsbrad, Ravenholt Manor. Here's where I wanted to go. This would be Durnhold Keep down there. Sketchy area to quest if you're on hardcore. And now we're moving through Hillsbrad, heading west. South Shore is going to be somewhere down there on our left. Yep, there it is down there. And a great place for Horde to AoE farm down here. All these humans you can kill. And then of course over here we have the Dalaran Shield, which is sealed off if you're running down on the surface, but up above it's actually transparent. I don't have to use any tricks to get through here, and you can get inside of it. And as you might expect, there's no nice cool city in here. It's just completely empty. There's nothing in here. You can see the effects even from the inside. So now we head out and head over toward Silverpine Forest. Down here would be Ambermill. And I will just quickly move south. Make sure I'm able to tell where I am. Yeah, I wanted to see this. So this would be the Greymane Wall. The really only indication of the future Worgen areas in Gilneas that it was in original Classic. And you couldn't get there, but if you could get through the Greymane Wall, the other side is just this big sort of flat square with a couple different textures bordered by wall, which would be like the placeholder for where they were going to put Gilneas. Of course, it ended up being much larger when it was actually in place. And then the other side of it is more of this recurring finished default continent that you could have been swimming around. And if we head north, there actually was some areas where you could have reached the beach from inside the continent if you were doing some horde questing here. And yeah, right in there. And then this is the town of Pyrewood. And one of my favorite instances, Shadowfang Keep. It's one of my favorite because it looks the same, largely same size, shape, and everything, whether you're in the instance version or the real world version, which is here. And then if we head further north through Silverpine, it's a little tougher to show from the air because in Classic, the fog effects, which even in private clients are extremely hard to figure out how to remove or adjust, because they're just hiding the terrain that has not yet rendered. So the fog effects actually happen to be thicker in some of these areas, or more pronounced, and so it's harder to actually see. Silverpine's one of these. But heading north through the various farms and different areas, and eventually we get to the south side of Tirisfall, which would be here. And if I then go west, you can see that border between Tirisfall and Silverpine. Silverpine on the left. And Tirisfall, this would be this whole starting area of Death Knell down below. It's where you'd be killing some bats, and there's a cave down in there. But yet another area where, yeah, there it is. There's the whole real, like, undead starting area. And another area where you might have tried early on to climb these mountains, you couldn't have, but over here, further west, it's as if they originally intended or allowed for even more. There's another giant area of just unused, very flat area between the playable, usable area of Tirisfall and the edge of the continent, which went way out over here. And one more time, we can see that the edge of the continent is finished, in case you were a swimmer explorer. But we had this big flat area that was now on sort of the northwest side. A lot of different heights in that terrain. And now popping into sort of the north side of Tirisfall. Eventually got to the beach with a lot of murlocs down there. 2 big sections if you were questing as Horde near Undercity. A lot of good early Horde questing in there. And I'll zoom across Tirisfall here because I want to get to Undercity. Hopefully I'm going the right way. Brill. There's the Zeppelin. And here's what I was looking for. So, of course, the Ruins of Lordaeron looks great when you're coming up to it, but from the sky, it's similar to Stormwind. There's nothing inside of it. Where's the Ruins of Lordaeron? The Ruins of Lordaeron and Undercity itself are a model, and again, the view calling means that unless we're close enough to it, it's not going to render in, but if we do get close, there it goes. It pops into existence for us there. And if I go back away from it, it pops out of existence. So that would be the Ruins of Lordaeron, and then further south is actually going to be where Undercity is. And I'll go just a little bit slower here. The camera's kind of flipping around. There I am. And if I look straight down, there's a section of Undercity. It's actually below the main map terrain. If I move along, you can see I've just clipped into the top, so I'm going to go back out just a little bit. There is one of the ruins areas that leads you in toward the elevator. The city's way down there, and the different sections, there goes the elevator, render in and out depending on where my character is. There's one of the borders, edges of the city, of the big circular city, and of course you can see then when I get to here, there's the terrain for the main map that it is laid into, and they actually broke it so that the city could go down into there. And we're inside the wall now. If I head out, you get to this area on the eastern side of Undercity, and it's actually, even though it's outside in the mountains, it's an area you never would have been able to get to, which is why the terrain looks just a little bit funky. So we continue west toward WPL. This would be the east side of Tirisfall here. You can go just a little bit faster. There's the bulwark, the entrance into WPL. Again, an area where sort of the effects, the fog effects, make it a little harder to explore from the sky. Get to one of the worst areas to be questing as a level 60, the ruins of Anderhall, down below. Chromie's in one of these buildings, I think there. And if I zoom around to the north, past those silos, you got to be so careful if you're on hardcore of those worms that they spawn and being slowed and killed by them. Get to another one of my favorite mage farming areas. There is Dawson's Tier. It's over there. And if we continue north, sort of the border between Tirisfall and WPL, you can see, I'm going to say Hearthglen is over there. That's the Northridge Lumber Camp. There it is. Hearthglen down there. And on the other side of Hearthglen would be Scarlet Monastery in Tirisfall down there. There's the side of the monastery. And then we come to another one of the most interesting relics of the unfinished area that's absolutely huge, the northern side of Western and Eastern Plaugelands, which you could tell they built out the northern side of this continent and then built those zones and fit them in. And so there's a lot of space in between the zones and the edge of the continent, which just looks like this. Big, flat, varying textures, different mountains that might border the zone. That would border the north side of WPL there. Some very strange texturing there. Terrain there, different textures that just were put together but not actually meshed at all. And as we come around over to here, we get to the pit. And this big pit would have been carved out to be able to have the entire model for Stratholme in it. And it would have fit that model, but they decided they just didn't need the entire thing in the main map. You can see the entrance to Stratholme is up there. There's the two entrance portals. But the only piece of Stratholme that's put in here is just meant to be seen in case you could ever see it maybe from mountains in the distance or anything. It's just a small piece of the entry area. And again, it's that view culling where we've got to be close enough to it for it to render in. This is the piece of Stratholme that's actually in the main overworld here. Only this amount. And then the rest of the pit that only goes that far is just this. And very quickly there's the entrance from the back, and of course it's transparent, but when you get to the other side of it you can see it. It's down there. And of course there would be Nax floating up above. And so if we continue through what I guess I'm calling the Stratholme pit. Again, very dark and harder to see what's going on in here, but you had different purple and green textures, and then the edge of the pit, which is again this zigzaggy terrain, which they did whenever there was varying heights that you weren't going to see. And then another huge flat area. And what I want to get to next is, so here is another sort of wall that would be like the north edge of EPL. And one of the cooler features of EPL, if I'm in the right spot, I think I am, is sort of this little, it's not quite a tunnel, but this little ridge. If you were in EPL and would come up to that area, you would see there would have been one little early model night elf down there, or blood elf. And then you could come along this little pathway. You'd be blocked by an invisible wall there, but if you could have gotten through it, come along this little pathway and there would be one little house that's the only indicator in the continent that there's going to be elves here, blood elves, for the Quel'Thalas area eventually that was added in TBC. And of course, north of that is actually no elf city, just the big unfinished area between the northern side of the zone and the edge of the continent. And you had to go all the way out to the edge of the continent, and I'll do this quickly, and then back to the west a bit. Get over to here, you get to where it is finished, and you can see again for the swimming explorers, this is what you would have seen. And if we head way back to the west, eventually we see this tower, which is the outside of the continent indicator that there was going to be some elven area here in the future. But this is all that was there, and that sort of is meant to, I think, link to what we saw in EPL, but it's of course very different spots on the map. That tower is far west of the indicator on EPL. So again, if we just zoom back across this big area to the north of EPL, eventually you get to the eastern side and different terrain heights between the continent border, this big flat area, and then the easternmost side of EPL. And down there would be Light's Hope Chapel. There is Tyr's Hand, which of course, if you're following SOD, evolves to become the Scarlet Enclave. And actually it's one of the few areas where they've added new maps to the classic build for that instance. And I'm going to look at that in another video because it's very interesting. They have added updated maps. But if we continue along here, this would be the south side of EPL on our right, and the north side of the Hinterlands on our left. And this would be the border between Hinterlands and EPL here. Big tree going into the Hinterlands. You don't ever really appreciate it until you can see it from the sky. This would be more border between Hinterlands and EPL down there. They sort of did a good job finishing these mountains, but then every so often there's a spot where it's not so finished. Down there would be, I think it's Darrowmere Lake. It's the lake with Stratholme in it. Might have the wrong name, but it's something like that. Let's see if it renders in. Yeah, Darrowmere Lake. You can see the effects all change, and then we go back to Hinterlands over here. And I'll just cut quickly across the Hinterlands because it's worth seeing the sort of troll area where you do the mallet quest and everything, I think, from the air. There's the temple that you would have to first climb. A couple of elites there at the top. And I think it's here. There's like a cave over there. And yeah, there it is. This is that big area that you have to climb. It's like multiple tiered troll ruins. Pretty cool looking area. And south of that is a waterfall being fed by no water. Arathi Highlands, and the town of Hammerfall down there, Horde town of Hammerfall. Getting back to the mountains that bordered Western Arathi is another big zone because Arathi just didn't fill up the entire continent. So there's this flat area between the finished continent edge. Down there is one of the few areas that had like no purpose. I think in SOD they added a purpose to it, but it was just a little farm that was put in, I think, for those swimming explorers I've mentioned a couple of times. And then we cross the divide again, heading back into the southern portion of the continent. And this would be sort of the northeastern side of Wetlands. It's a big flat area. And one of the first areas, and there'll be more of these, where you hit an invisible wall. There wasn't a lot of these in the game, but there was invisible walls in a few spots. And so I've just sort of glitched myself or used a command to get myself past it. And so then down in there we have the dragons for, I think it's the Horde Ani neck quest that you have to get up here and kill one of these dragons on the western side of Wetlands. And sort of an interesting thing up here is the only original classic reference to Grim Batol is this big door. Of course, this became a whole zone and instance and everything in future expansions. Nothing there. If I use that same command and we just peek in here, go forward 2 or 3 notches, nothing in here. We're just inside a transparent mountain. There's the back of the door, and not a whole lot going on here. If you ever wondered, gosh, what's in those doors? That's the kind of thing that you would see. Not a whole lot. So if I continue south, there's the other side of the dam, the Loch Modan. Speed along over here. More terrain differences between Loch Modan and just the border, I guess it would be. Edge there, there's the lodge down there. Yeah, Farstrider Lodge. This would still called the Wetlands, and the ocean is way down there. Loch Modan is very much higher than in terms of terrain, and it's so high that they knew they didn't need to finish these mountains up here to be able to see them. But another area where several different terrains are sort of just patched together as we get to the southern side of Loch Modan and the northern side of Badlands that would be down to the left. Swing around here. And there's one thing I want to show way here on the west side of the Badlands. Again, that's where sort of the border comes together. There's this big flat area further down here. I think I need to be up here for this. I think I was past where I wanted to be. I think it's back up here. Yeah, here we go. So sort of on this western side, or yeah, on the eastern side of Badlands is this big rectangular shaped hole for really no reason whatsoever, just sort of between the ocean and Badlands. And it goes way down in there and then is just sort of finished off. But one of the very odd just relics of how this whole thing kind of came together. And then you have a unfinished, it's terrained, but just with like one sort of blank texture over it, but this huge like gray zone between the edge of the world over here. I'll fly very quickly There's where the sort of terrain comes together, and it's this kind of big gray, oddly textured zone that would be to the east of the Burning Steppes, which if I go west will be down here. Hit another couple of walls, but that's okay. I'm not going that way this time. I want to head back toward, this would be where that sort of unfinished zone comes together with Redridge. This would be like North Redridge and South Burning Steppes. Just have to move my map over a little bit. And this will be one of the areas that's probably almost the hardest to kind of navigate, showing what I want to show, because I'm going to hit all kinds of invisible walls here, but it's worth showing. So I will just spam my move forward macro and kind of run along. Eventually that might show up in chat as far as I can. Like that. What you see, try to move up just a little bit, is a lot of very strange terrain heights between northern Redridge and southern Burning Steppes. And there's the weird like border that I was looking for. Like down there is a very strange sort of edge of northern Redridge. Go forward a little bit more. And the Burning Steppes on our right. And you can actually go over that way. There we go. There's Burning Steppes and Blackrock Mountain. Looks pretty cool from a distance. We'd head up to head into PRD or UPRS or LBRS or MC. And of course, Burning Steppes borders a much more tranquil area of Elwyn down below. I'll zoom across here very quickly. This would be the border between Redridge and Duskwood. There's Deadwind Pass, which I'll come back to in a moment. Look at that in a second. There's the Karazhan Tower. There would be a bit of Blasted Lands. Wanted to see also Swamp of Sorrows. Over here, Swamp of Sorrows is another one it's tough to look at because of the way the view fog comes in and is so pronounced here. But that's Swamp of Sorrows down in there, and up here would be the Blasted Lands, and you can see Netherguard Keep from the air. Looks pretty cool. And outside of Netherguard Keep would be the swamp over there. Ocean. Go back into the main area down here. You have the Dark Portal, which of course from the sky you can see is truly a big, looks like a meteor strike, but it would be the explosion out of the Dark Portal right there. And if you could have gone south of the Dark Portal, you get to another one of the start of one of the more interesting areas, I think. This southern border of Blasted Lands, where again, they didn't pay much heed to the terrain matching up with the continent border terrain on our left. But you start to get to southern Stranglethorn, and this area is actually like southeast of where, okay, so down here would be the Blasted Lands demon area, and Kazakh would be down in there somewhere, and there he is. And if we go back to where I was, this area that is south of Stranglethorn, we're now like south of the uninstanced area of ZG. You can see that just so that there was in the backdrop of the areas where you would be playing, they put so that you could see some trees. They put these trees down here like this, but they didn't even match up with the ground. And there's a lot of strange terrain heights and different textures here, and a lot of that zigzagging on this southern side of ZG. That was sort of a big mess as they pulled it together, and they just, it's almost as if they weren't sure what they were going to do, put the different zones together and knew this was going to be an unused area and just left it as is. There's a cave that comes out up in there. There's a waterfall that comes down here that like nobody was ever going to be able to see. So a very odd thing. Another one of these little pits, a lot of zigzagging texture. And then if we move in here, we can see Stranglethorn proper from the sky. Jungle, foresty jungle looking area. And if we head back toward the entrance to one of my favorite areas, ZG down here, you probably know that behind the instance portal is the entire uninstanced version of ZG, and it's largely the same in terms of size and geography, but of course Akar's temple is completely different. This is an old temple model that they just stuck in here and they never updated it. But the architecture is largely the same, with some differences. Don't have the big stairway up here with the quest giver that you normally would. And then there's this big decorative temple in the back. Looks pretty cool. And if we were to be able to head up and out of the back of ZG, get back down into that demon area of Blasted Lands, which was here. And if we head north, we should head toward Deadwind Pass and Karazhan. This is kind of a cool area. This is one of the areas between the zones that you can actually get to in any version of the game from the forest in South Duskwood. You can get up and explore all these mountains, which I've done many times. Here's the Karazhan Tower. Again, the early version of it. They intended there to be an entrance up here with maybe a flight path into it, as you can see. And then one of the most well-known, interesting, coolest little Easter eggs in the game that you probably know already. If you are to glitch into this tower, which you can do as most classes in the game, there is a happy face on a texture on the terrain on the inside of the tower for whatever reason. So heading back out of Deadwind Pass, I'm just gonna go quickly across, not quite that fast, but quickly across Duskwood, because it's one more of the areas where you don't have a lot to see unless you're down in it, because of the effects of making it look like dark and night and everything else. But then we get to, this is like northern Stranglethorn here. And Westfall. Lost my bearings a bit, but I wanted to show this. There is ZG Island, will be in the distance over here. There it is there. And one of my favorite things, of course, the wall for Van Cleef's big ship from the outside, where he would have sailed out there. And of course, it's not in there. The ship is only in the instance version, but that's where that would be. And all of the uninstanced version of Dead Mines is down below in this mountain in here, which you can see in a different one of my videos. And if we head just quickly across to see it, the rest of Westfall, Sentinel Hill, and back into Elwyn Forest, watching out for Hogger, and I think we will end it here at RP headquarters, Goldshire. And that is the full flyover of the Eastern Kingdoms vanilla map. If you enjoyed this and don't mind clicking like or sub, I appreciate it. And please leave a comment if I should go for it and make the Eastern Kingdoms version of this flyover, or if you have questions or suggestions or would like to see anything else. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.